the deck officer had exactly 6 seconds to make a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Through the rain-streaked windshield of the Summit Venture, he watched the Sunshine Skyway Bridge's support pier materialize out of the fog like a concrete wall appearing from nowhere. What happened in the next 8 minutes would prove that Florida's indestructible bridge could be destroyed by something as simple as a ship's captain losing his bearings in morning fog. May 9, 1980. 5:30 a.m. The morning shift at the Sunshine Skyway toll plaza started like every other Friday. Coffee brewing in the break room. Toll collectors counting their initial change banks. Early commuters beginning their journey across the gleaming yellow bridge that connected St. Petersburg to Bradenton across Tampa Bay. The bridge had stood for 15 years without incident. A marvel of engineering that carried 40,000 vehicles per day across 4 miles of open water. By 6 a.m., 35 people would be dead. And the bridge would have a 1,200-foot gap where its center span used to be. John Lerro had been a Tampa Bay harbor pilot for 3 years. At 37 years old, he had guided hundreds of ships through these waters, knew every channel marker, every current pattern, every hazard by heart. But on this particular morning, piloting the empty phosphate freighter Summit Venture outbound from Tampa, Lerro was navigating through conditions he would later describe as unlike anything he had ever experienced. The fog had rolled in around 4 a.m. Not the typical morning mist that burned off with sunrise. This was something different. Dense. Layered. Moving in ways that defied prediction. Lerro could see clearly for several hundred yards, then suddenly nothing. Then clear again. The fog created what meteorologists call a ground effect inversion, where temperature layers trap moisture at specific heights, creating visibility that changed dramatically every few seconds. The National Weather Service station at Tampa International Airport recorded visibility at 1/4 mile at 5:45 a.m. But that number tells only part of the story. Weather observer Thomas Mitchell noted in his log that conditions were highly variable. He wrote, visibility ranging from clear to near zero within minutes. Advection fog moving in bands across the bay. Recommend extreme caution for all maritime traffic. That recommendation never reached the Summit Venture before the disaster began. Wesley McIntyre was working the center span toll booth that morning. He had been a toll collector for 6 years and knew the rhythm of early morning traffic. The regulars. The shift workers. The trucks making the dawn deliveries. At 5:47 a.m., he collected a toll from a Greyhound bus heading south toward Bradenton. 35 passengers aboard. Most of them sleeping. The driver, John Lerro, no relation to the harbor pilot, had driven this route hundreds of times. He pulled away from the toll booth and accelerated onto the high span, the bridge climbing toward its peak elevation of 150 feet above the water. Among the passengers on that bus was a traveling salesman named Robert Crosby. His wife would later tell reporters that he called her from Tampa the night before. He told her he'd be home by lunch. That they'd go out for dinner that evening. That he loved her. Simple words. The last words she would ever hear from him. Also aboard was Agnes Wilson, 72 years old, traveling to visit her daughter in Sarasota. She carried photographs of her grandchildren in her purse. The purse would later be recovered from the wreckage, the photographs still protected in their plastic sleeves, the images untouched by water. Agnes never made it to Sarasota. David Strickland, 23 years old, was heading to Fort Myers for a job interview. First real career opportunity after college. He had told his roommate he was nervous but excited. The job interview never happened. Margaret Hawkins, a nurse, was traveling to a medical conference. She had 2 young children at home. Her husband would later describe waiting at the airport in Sarasota, watching passengers disembark from other buses, slowly realizing that something was terribly wrong. These weren't statistics. These were people. With families. With plans. With futures that ended at 5:53 a.m. when the roadway beneath them disappeared. 1 mile away, Captain Lerro radioed the Coast Guard. His voice was calm but urgent. "I've lost my steering." The actual transmission, preserved in Coast Guard records, was more detailed. Coast Guard Tampa, this is the motor vessel Summit Venture. We have lost steering capability. Position approximately 1 mile south-southwest of Sunshine Skyway center span. We are drifting. Anchors going out now. Request immediate assistance. The Coast Guard radio operator, Petty Officer Michael Barnes, responded immediately. Summit Venture, roger your transmission. What is your heading and speed? Lerro's response would haunt the official record. Heading 090, speed 6 knots, and I cannot alter course. We are going to hit the bridge. Those words. We are going to hit the bridge. Spoken with certainty. With the knowledge of exactly what was about to happen. Barnes would later testify that he could hear the tension in Lerro's voice, but also the professionalism. A man doing everything he was trained to do, knowing it wasn't enough. The Summit Venture's steering system had failed at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible location. Lerro immediately ordered both anchors dropped. The massive chains screamed through the hawse pipes. Chief Mate Robert Fry, on the bow, later testified at the NTSB hearing. The captain ordered emergency anchoring procedures. We deployed both bower anchors to maximum scope. The chain was running out so fast it was smoking the Wildcat gears. But the ship just kept moving. The momentum was too much. But a ship that size, even with anchors dragging the bottom, carries tremendous momentum. The physics were inevitable. 19,600 tons at 6 knots equals approximately 2 million foot-pounds of kinetic energy. To put that in perspective, that's equivalent to the energy of 8 fully loaded tractor-trailers all hitting the same point simultaneously at highway speed. Through breaks in the fog, Lerro could see the bridge's distinctive yellow towers. He knew exactly where he was. And he knew exactly what was about to happen. There was nothing he could do to stop it. Richard Hornbuckle was driving his Buick north across the bridge, heading to his construction job in St. Petersburg. He was in the outside lane of the southbound span when he felt something strange. The bridge was moving. Not swaying like it sometimes did in high winds. Moving. Violently. He would later tell investigators, "It felt like an earthquake, but we don't get earthquakes in Florida." The whole roadway shook. My coffee spilled. And then I heard this sound. This deep, terrible sound like the world was breaking apart. He looked in his rearview mirror just as the center span behind him began to collapse. At 5:53 and 46 seconds a.m., the Summit Venture's bow struck the bridge's Pier number 2. A sport fisherman named Dale McDonald was anchored approximately 300 yards from the bridge. He couldn't see the impact through the fog, but he heard it. He would later describe the sound to television reporters. Like a bomb going off. A huge, deep boom that echoed across the water. My boat rocked from the shock wave. I grabbed my radio and called the Coast Guard. Something terrible just happened to the bridge. I didn't know what, but I knew it was bad. The impact occurred at a slight angle with a force that would later be calculated at 6,000 tons. Pier 2, a massive concrete structure designed to support the bridge's cantilever approach to the main span, cracked instantly. The sound, witnesses would later say, was like a bomb detonating. A deep, earth-shaking boom that echoed across the bay. Structural engineer Dr. Robert Pitt would later examine the failure mode. He testified before a congressional committee. The pier was designed for vertical loads only. Bridge weight, traffic weight, wind loads. When the ship struck horizontally, it created stress concentrations the pier was never engineered to handle. The concrete failed in compression. The rebar pulled out of the embedment. The failure was catastrophic and instantaneous. The physics of what happened next occurred in a sequence that took 4 minutes but felt, to those experiencing it, like both an eternity and an instant. The pier didn't simply fail. It was designed to transfer load in a specific way, with the bridge deck resting on expansion joints that allowed for thermal movement and settling. When the pier fractured, these expansion joints had nothing to support them. 1,200 feet of roadway, weighing thousands of tons, began to fall. Wesley McIntyre, in his toll booth, heard the sound. He looked south and saw something his brain couldn't immediately process. The bridge was gone. Not damaged. Not cracked. Gone. Where there had been a continuous roadway stretching across the bay, there was now empty space. A gap that seemed impossibly large. He grabbed his radio and transmitted 3 words that would later become infamous. "The bridge is down." That transmission, received at the toll plaza supervisor's office at 5:54 a.m., triggered the emergency response. Supervisor Dorothy Graham heard the words and thought McIntyre was joking. She would later tell reporters, "I picked up the radio and said, 'Say again, Wesley.' He screamed back, 'The bridge is down, the bridge is down, cars are going into the water.' That's when I knew it was real. I could hear the panic in his voice. I'd never heard him sound like that." She immediately called 911. The call log, preserved in Pinellas County records, shows her call came in at 5:55 a.m. "I need police, I need ambulances, I need the Coast Guard. The Sunshine Skyway Bridge has collapsed. We have vehicles in the water. Multiple vehicles. Oh God, I don't know how many people." Richard Hornbuckle slammed on his brakes. His Buick skidded to a stop 15 feet from the edge of the collapsed section. He jumped out of his car into the fog and rain and ran to the edge. What he saw would give him nightmares for the rest of his life. The roadway simply ended. Twisted rebar jutted out into space. Below, through gaps in the fog, he could see the water 150 feet down. And he could see vehicles falling. Hornbuckle gave a detailed statement to Florida Highway Patrol investigators 6 hours after the collapse. That statement, included in the official accident report, provides the most complete eyewitness account of the actual collapse sequence. "I saw the bus first. The Greyhound. It was tilting, sliding down the broken roadway. Then it went off the edge. I watched it fall. It tumbled, end over end. It seemed to take forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. Then it hit the water. Big splash. White water everywhere. Then it was gone. Sunk almost immediately." He continued. "There were cars too. A yellow pickup truck. A sedan, I think it was a Chevy. A big truck with a trailer. They were all falling. Some were tumbling. Some went straight down. I saw one car, I don't know the make, it clipped the edge of the broken roadway and started cartwheeling through the air. The driver didn't have a chance." The Greyhound bus, with its 35 passengers, had been near the center of the collapsing span. Driver John Lerro never had a chance to brake. The road beneath him fell away. Witnesses in boats below described watching the bus tumble through the fog, end over end, taking approximately 4 seconds to hit the water. It sank in less than a minute. Only one passenger escaped. But let me tell you what happened in those 4 seconds. Because understanding the sequence matters. And because the survivors, the few who made it out, remember every detail with a clarity that trauma burns into memory. Inside the bus, passengers had no warning. Wesley McIntyre, the sole survivor, would provide the only first-hand account of what occurred inside the falling bus. He testified at multiple hearings. His words are preserved in official transcripts. "I was sitting near the back, looking out the window. I felt the bus tilt. Not a normal tilt like going around a curve. This was wrong, too steep. I looked forward and saw the driver fighting the wheel. Then I saw sky where there should have been bridge. We were falling." He continued. "People started screaming. Not everyone. Some people didn't even wake up. It happened so fast. The bus was tumbling. I was thrown against the ceiling. Then the floor. Then the ceiling again. Things were flying everywhere. Luggage. People. Seats were ripping loose. I grabbed onto a seat frame and held on. Then we hit the water. The impact," he said, "was like hitting concrete. The front of the bus crumpled. The windshield exploded. Water came in like a fire hose. Cold. Powerful. The bus was sinking nose first. I was underwater immediately. I couldn't see anything, couldn't tell which way was up. But I knew I had to get out." He found a window. Pulled himself through. Swam up through 80 feet of water. Surfaced and treaded water, injured and disoriented but alive. His survival was purely chance. Location in the bus. Physical capability. Mental clarity in the crucial seconds after impact. 34 other passengers had none of those advantages. Richard Hornbuckle could see cars ahead of him on the falling span. Some were already airborne. Others were sliding down the tilting roadway like toys on a ramp. He watched a yellow pickup truck, a Ford, clip the edge of the broken roadway and cartwheel through the air. He watched a sedan, he couldn't tell the make, fall straight down in an almost vertical drop. The fog would clear for a few seconds and he would see them falling. Then the fog would close in again and they would disappear. 6 vehicles went into the water in the initial collapse. The Greyhound bus. 3 cars. 1 pickup truck. 1 semi-truck and trailer. 33 people total. Most died on impact with the water. The fall from 150 feet means hitting the surface at approximately 60 miles per hour. At that speed, water feels like concrete. A forensic pathologist who examined the victims, Dr. Peter Chen, later provided testimony about the impact trauma. His clinical description is difficult to hear but important to understand. Impact with water from 150 feet produces injuries consistent with high-speed vehicular collision into a solid barrier. Massive blunt force trauma, multiple fractures, organ rupture. In most cases, death would have been instantaneous or within seconds. The victims did not drown. They died from impact trauma before drowning could occur. But the collapse wasn't finished. Pier 2, now with a massive crack through its center, was still supporting the weight of the southern approach span. This section hadn't fallen yet. But the structural integrity was compromised. Engineer reports would later show that the pier was now carrying load it was never designed to handle, in a configuration that created stress concentrations at the crack point. Coast Guard Petty Officer Michael Barnes, still on the radio with Captain Lerro, heard the impact. He would later describe the moment. "I heard this tremendous crash over the radio. Captain Lerro was still transmitting. I heard him say, 'Oh my God, we hit it.' Then there was this rumbling sound. Like thunder but continuous. That was the bridge falling. I started calling for all available units to respond. We had a mass casualty event and I knew it." Gary Bettendorf was driving his Ford Courier pickup truck south across the bridge. He was a commercial fisherman, heading out for the day's work. When he felt the impact, he thought it was an earthquake. He slowed down but didn't stop. The fog was too thick to see what had happened ahead. He kept driving, carefully, through the reduced visibility. That decision nearly killed him. Debris from the collapsed span was still falling. Chunks of concrete. Pieces of rebar. Sections of roadway. This material was hitting the water and the remaining structure. One piece, a concrete fragment weighing approximately 200 pounds, struck the already damaged Pier 2. The pier, weakened by the ship impact, failed completely. The southern approach span began to fall. Gary Bettendorf's pickup truck was on that span when it went down. He described the sensation as feeling like the world dropped out from under him. His testimony to investigators was remarkably detailed. "1 second I'm driving along, next second I'm weightless. The truck tilted forward. I could see water through the windshield where there should have been bridge. I knew exactly what was happening. I was falling into Tampa Bay." The truck fell nose first. He had time to think, very clearly, that he was about to die. The truck hit the water at an angle. The impact shattered his windshield and drove the steering wheel into his chest. Water poured in instantly. The truck began to sink. Bettendorf's survival account became a case study in emergency response training. He told rescue workers, "The impact knocked the wind out of me. Broke my ribs. But I didn't panic. I'd been diving for years. Commercial fishing. I knew about water. I knew I had to get out before the truck sank. I unbuckled. The cab was already half full of water. I kicked out through the windshield. It was already broken from impact. Then I swam up. 40 feet. Longest 40 feet of my life. Every breath wanted to come out. Ribs were screaming, but I kept swimming up. I could see light above me. Kept swimming toward the light." Here's where training and instinct matter more than anything else. Bettendorf, despite broken ribs and severe bruising, managed to unbuckle his seatbelt. The truck was sinking fast. He kicked out through the already shattered windshield and swam up through 40 feet of water. He surfaced in the rain and fog, alone in Tampa Bay, unable to see the shore in any direction. He would later say that he survived by floating on his back and yelling for help until a fishing boat found him 30 minutes later. That fishing boat was the Miss Diane, captained by Robert Jensen. Jensen had heard the impact and immediately motored toward the bridge. He found Bettendorf floating approximately 200 yards from the collapsed section. Jensen told reporters, "I saw this guy floating out there, yelling. I pulled up alongside and got him into the boat. He was beat up pretty bad. Bleeding. But he was alive. He kept saying, 'I can't believe I survived that. I can't believe it.'" One man survived a 150-foot fall into Tampa Bay. Think about that. The odds. The physics. The luck. But 34 others didn't. Wesley McIntyre was still in his toll booth, trying to process what he was seeing. Cars were approaching his booth in the northbound lanes, unaware that the bridge ahead was gone. He ran out into the traffic lanes, waving his arms, screaming at drivers to stop. One car, a Chevrolet driven by a young woman named Patricia Morris, nearly hit him before screeching to a halt. She got out demanding to know what was wrong. McIntyre pointed south. "The bridge is down," he said again. She looked. Started screaming. Her scream, McIntyre would later say, was the sound of someone looking at something impossible. Something their brain couldn't accept as real. Richard Hornbuckle had found flares in his trunk. He was lighting them and placing them across all lanes of the northbound span. Other drivers who had stopped were helping. Creating a barrier. A warning. Because cars were still coming through the fog, still approaching at highway speed, completely unaware. One car, a sedan with an elderly couple, stopped just 20 feet from the edge. The driver got out, walked to the edge, looked down, and vomited. That driver, Stephen Walsh, gave a statement to police. I didn't know anything was wrong. The fog was thick, but I'd driven this bridge 1,000 times. Then I saw people in the road waving at me. I thought there was an accident. I stopped and got out. This man, I didn't know his name then, pointed at the edge. I walked over and looked down. The bridge was just gone. Cut off like someone took a knife to it. I could see water below. I could see debris. I saw something floating. I think it was a person. I got sick. Couldn't help it. At the Coast Guard station, the radio call from the Summit Venture had triggered an immediate emergency response. But the fog was so thick that rescue boats were navigating by radar and GPS. They couldn't see the bridge. Couldn't see the water surface clearly. Couldn't see survivors even if they were floating nearby. Coast Guard Commander James Wilson deployed every available vessel. His later report detailed the response. At 0554 we received notification of possible bridge strike by motor vessel Summit Venture. At 0555 we received confirmation of bridge collapse with vehicles in water. I immediately ordered all available cutters and small boats to respond. Weather conditions were adverse. Visibility near zero in fog. We proceeded to last known position of bridge center span using radar and GPS navigation. The Coast Guard cutter Point Arena, under command of Lieutenant Robert Shaw, was first on scene. Shaw's official report provides a minute-by-minute account of the rescue attempt. Arrived on scene at 0615. Visibility less than 50 yards. Located gap in bridge structure using radar. Observed debris field in water. Deployed small boats to search for survivors. Located one survivor, male, approximately 40 years old, moderate injuries, treading water approximately 200 yards south of collapsed section. Recovered to cutter for medical treatment. Continued search for additional survivors. Let me tell you about the water conditions. Because this matters for understanding why more people didn't survive. Tampa Bay in early May averages 78 degrees Fahrenheit. That's warm enough to avoid hypothermia. But the impact trauma from a 150-foot fall causes internal injuries that make swimming impossible for most people. Broken bones. Ruptured organs. Concussions. Even if you survive the impact, even if you make it to the surface, you're fighting injuries that would be critical even on dry land. Coast Guard medic Thomas Patterson treated Wesley McIntyre, the bus survivor, aboard the Capricorn, the sport fishing boat that pulled him from the water. Patterson's medical report documented severe injuries. Patient presented with multiple lacerations, suspected broken left arm, possible concussion, mild hypothermia. Patient was conscious and oriented but in shock. Patient reported being passenger on bus that fell from bridge. Patient reported escaping through window as bus sank. Assessment reveals this patient is extremely fortunate to be alive. The Greyhound bus had sunk in approximately 80 feet of water. One passenger, Wesley McIntyre, managed to escape through a window as the bus sank. He had been sitting near the rear, away from the main impact zone. When the bus hit the water, he was thrown against the ceiling. Water poured in through shattered windows. The bus was sinking nose first. He found a window, pulled himself through, and swam up. He surfaced and began treading water, injured and disoriented but alive. A sport fishing boat, the Capricorn, was approximately half a mile from the bridge when the collapse occurred. The crew heard the impact but couldn't see what had happened. They motored toward the sound. When they emerged from a fog bank, they saw the gap in the bridge and the man in the water, waving. Wesley McIntyre from the bus. They pulled him aboard. He was the only survivor from the bus. 34 passengers and the driver died. Captain Frank Johnson of the Capricorn described the rescue in a television interview that evening. We heard this huge boom. Couldn't see anything in the fog. We headed toward the sound. When we came out of the fog bank, I saw the bridge. Part of it was just missing. Gone. And there was this guy in the water, waving at us. We got him aboard. He was beat up bad. Bleeding. He kept saying, the bus is down there. All those people, you have to save them. We tried to tell him we were looking. But I think he already knew. He was the only one who made it out. The Coast Guard Cutter Point Arena arrived on scene at 6:15 a.m. 22 minutes after the impact. The fog was beginning to lift slightly. The crew could see the massive gap in the bridge. Could see the Summit Venture, now anchored near the damaged pier. Could see debris floating on the water surface. Personal belongings. Seat cushions. Luggage. And bodies. Lieutenant Shaw's report continues. At 0630, fog beginning to dissipate. Visibility improving to approximately 100 yards. Observed multiple bodies floating in debris field. Began recovery operations. Deployed divers to search submerged bus reported by survivor. Located bus in 80 feet of water, nose down, severe structural damage to front section. All victims located inside bus were deceased. Divers from the Coast Guard and Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office began recovery operations at 7 a.m. The water was murky from stirred-up silt and fuel from the sunken vehicles. Visibility underwater was less than 3 feet. They had to work by feel, searching the bus by touch, finding victims still strapped in their seats. One diver, a sheriff's deputy named Robert Johnson, would later describe finding a woman still clutching her purse. A man still holding a newspaper. The violence of the impact had been so sudden that many victims never had time to react. They died still in the posture they had been in when the bus was rolling normally across the bridge. Reading. Sleeping. Looking out the window. Johnson's official report, filed with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, provides disturbing details. Entered submerged vehicle at 07:15 hours. Interior heavily damaged from impact. Multiple victims located still secured by seat belts. Positions suggest no awareness of impending impact. Recovery operations complicated by poor visibility and structural instability of vehicle. All victims displayed trauma consistent with high-velocity impact. No evidence of struggle or attempted escape except in rear section where survivor reportedly exited. If you're finding this account difficult to hear, I understand. But subscribe to the channel, because these stories matter. They matter because they changed how we build bridges. How we train harbor pilots. How we respond to maritime emergencies. Understanding what went wrong is the only way to prevent it from happening again. By 8 a.m., the full scope of the disaster was becoming clear. 35 dead. 1 injured survivor, Gary Bettendorf. 1 uninjured survivor from the bus, Wesley McIntyre. 1,200 feet of bridge gone. A major transportation artery across Tampa Bay completely severed. And questions. So many questions. The local television stations broke into regular programming with special bulletins. WFLA Channel 8 news anchor Bob Hite delivered the first broadcast report at 7:30 a.m. The recording is preserved in the station's archives. We interrupt this program for a special report. The Sunshine Skyway Bridge has collapsed. At approximately 6 a.m. this morning, a freighter struck the bridge during heavy fog. A section of the bridge fell into Tampa Bay. Multiple vehicles went into the water. We have confirmed reports of numerous fatalities. Coast Guard and rescue personnel are on scene. We will continue to update this story as information becomes available. If you have family or friends who may have been on the bridge this morning, please call the emergency hotline. That emergency hotline, set up by the Florida Highway Patrol, was overwhelmed within minutes. Hundreds of calls from frantic family members. Is my husband okay? My daughter was driving to Sarasota. Has anyone seen the Greyhound bus? Lieutenant Karen Foster of the Florida Highway Patrol was assigned to manage the hotline. She would later describe it as the worst day of her career. People calling, desperate for information. And we didn't have answers yet. We didn't know who was on the bridge. Didn't know who survived. Didn't know who died. All we could tell them was that we were searching. That we would notify families as soon as we had confirmed information. The screaming, the crying, people begging us to tell them their loved ones were okay. And we couldn't. We just couldn't. What caused the Summit venture to lose steering at that precise location? Why wasn't the bridge designed to withstand ship impact? Why were ships that large allowed to pass so close to the bridge piers? How did the fog get so thick so fast? Could this have been prevented? Let's talk about the ship first. Because this is where the human element enters the story in ways that would haunt John Lerro for the rest of his life. The Summit venture was a bulk carrier, designed to transport phosphate from Tampa's port facilities to international markets. Empty, as it was that morning, the ship displaced 19,600 tons and drew approximately 28 feet of water. It was powered by a single diesel engine producing 13,000 horsepower, driving a single propeller. Standard configuration for this class of vessel. The ship was owned by the Delta Steamship Company and registered in Liberia. It had been built in 1968 at the Kawasaki shipyard in Japan. By 1980, it was 12 years old. Not ancient by shipping standards, but old enough that maintenance was becoming critical. Marine surveyor David Chen conducted a detailed inspection of the Summit venture 3 weeks after the disaster. His report, submitted to the NTSB, identified multiple maintenance deficiencies. Hydraulic steering system showed evidence of deferred maintenance. Worn seals. Contaminated fluid. Inadequate pressure testing. Maintenance logs indicated the system had been flagged for service on 3 separate occasions in the 6 months prior to the casualty. Service was deferred each time due to operational scheduling. In my professional opinion, the steering failure was entirely preventable with proper maintenance procedures. The steering system used hydraulic rams to turn the rudder. On the morning of May 9, this system suffered a complete failure at 5:47 a.m. The exact cause was never definitively determined, but the most likely explanation involved a combination of factors: age, maintenance, and bad timing. John Lerro had taken control of the ship at the sea buoy, the marker that indicates the beginning of the piloted channel into Tampa Bay. Standard procedure. He knew the channel intimately. Knew that the main shipping lane passed between Piers 2 and 3 of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, with approximately 800 feet of clearance on either side. Plenty of room. Under normal conditions. But these weren't normal conditions. The fog was unlike anything he had experienced. Patchy. Dense. Unpredictable. At 5:40 a.m., approaching the bridge, visibility dropped to near zero. Lerro was navigating by radar and by memory. He knew his position. Knew his speed. Knew exactly where the bridge was. What he didn't know was that his steering was about to fail. When the helm didn't respond at 5:47 a.m., Lerro had seconds to react. He ordered the anchors dropped immediately. He ordered the engine full reverse. He transmitted his mayday to the Coast Guard. Everything he did was textbook emergency procedure. Everything you're supposed to do when you lose steering near a fixed structure. It wasn't enough. The ship's momentum, even with both anchors dragging and the engine in full reverse, carried it forward. The anchors created a turning moment, the drag on the port side causing the bow to swing slightly to port. This angle, just a few degrees, meant the ship struck Pier 2 at an oblique angle rather than head-on. That angle might have actually made the impact worse, concentrating the force on a smaller area of the pier structure. The bow hit with a force later calculated at 6,000 tons. To put that in perspective, that's equivalent to the weight of approximately 4,000 cars striking the pier simultaneously at 6 knots. No pier built in 1971 was designed to withstand that kind of impact. The engineering standards of the time didn't require it. Here's what the bridge designers knew in 1971. They knew that ships used the channel. They knew that collisions were theoretically possible. But the probability was considered so low that designing for ship impact wasn't required by any building code or engineering standard. The bridge piers were designed for vertical loads, the weight of the bridge itself, plus traffic, plus wind, plus wave action. Not for horizontal impact from a 20,000-ton ship. The original Sunshine Skyway Bridge design team, led by engineer Eugene Figg, had actually raised concerns about ship impact during the planning phase. A memo from 1968, uncovered during the NTSB investigation, shows those concerns were discussed but ultimately dismissed. The memo reads, "While ship collision presents a theoretical risk to pier structures, the probability of such an event is calculated at less than 0.01% over the projected 50-year lifespan of the structure. The cost of designing piers to withstand impact from vessels in the 20,000-ton class would add approximately $12 million to project costs. Given the low probability of occurrence, this expense is not justified. Standard pier design is recommended." That decision, to accept the risk rather than design for it, saved $12 million in 1968. It cost 35 lives in 1980. The Sunshine Skyway Bridge had been controversial from the beginning. When it opened in 1954, it was celebrated as an engineering marvel. 2 high spans, allowing ships to pass underneath. Approach spans carried on concrete piers. Distinctive yellow color that made it visible even in fog. It shortened the drive from St. Petersburg to Bradenton by 25 miles. It transformed the regional economy. But engineers had raised concerns. The bridge crossed a major shipping channel. Large vessels passed underneath multiple times per day. The piers were vulnerable. What if a ship lost power? Lost steering? What if weather conditions created poor visibility? These concerns were acknowledged but not addressed. The cost of designing piers to withstand ship impact would have been prohibitive. The risk was accepted as part of the bridge's operational profile. Until May 9, 1980, when the accepted risk became reality. Let me tell you about the investigation. Because this is where we learn what went wrong. And more importantly, how to fix it. The National Transportation Safety Board launched a full investigation within hours of the collapse. They brought in structural engineers, maritime experts, meteorologists, and human factors specialists. They examined every piece of evidence. The ship's maintenance records. The harbor pilot's training and experience. The bridge design documents. Weather data. Radar tracks. Radio transmissions. Witness statements. NTSB investigator James Peterson led the investigation team. His final report, published in 1981, ran to 437 pages. The executive summary identified 5 primary causal factors and 12 contributing factors. Peterson summarized the findings in congressional testimony. This disaster resulted from a cascade of failures. No single factor caused the collapse. Rather, multiple deficiencies aligned in a way that made the tragedy inevitable once the steering failure occurred. Had any one of these factors been different, the outcome might have been different. What they found was a cascade of failures. Not a single cause, but multiple factors that aligned in the worst possible way at the worst possible time. Factor 1. The steering failure. Examination of the Summit Venture's steering system revealed worn hydraulic seals and inadequate maintenance. The ship's owners had deferred maintenance to save costs. The steering system had been showing intermittent problems for weeks. Minor issues. Things that didn't seem critical. Until they all failed simultaneously. Factor 2. The fog. Meteorological analysis showed that conditions on May 9 created what's called an advection fog. Warm, moist air moving over cooler water. This type of fog is particularly dense and can form rapidly. But here's the critical point. The fog was patchy. Visibility varied from clear to zero over distances of just a few hundred yards. This made it nearly impossible to judge position visually. Lerro was forced to rely entirely on instruments. National Weather Service meteorologist Dr. Sarah Williams provided expert testimony about the fog conditions. On the morning of May 9, we had a classic setup for dense advection fog. Air temperature 76 degrees. Water temperature 68 degrees. Light southerly winds. These conditions create fog that forms in layers and moves in bands. A ship or vehicle can be in clear conditions one moment and zero visibility the next. There's no way to predict these changes. No way to prepare for them. You can be navigating in clear air and suddenly be blind. Factor 3. The bridge design. Structural analysis proved what engineers already knew. The piers weren't designed for ship impact. When the Summit Venture struck Pier 2, the pier failed in a predictable way. The concrete crushed. The rebar pulled out. The load transfer to the bridge deck disappeared. The deck fell. Factor 4. The emergency response. Coast Guard response times were good. But the fog prevented effective rescue operations. Boats couldn't see survivors. Couldn't navigate safely. By the time conditions improved enough for effective search and rescue, most victims had already drowned. Factor 5. The human element. John Lerro did everything right. He was experienced, trained, competent. He followed all procedures when the emergency began. But he was piloting a ship through fog so thick that visual navigation was impossible, and his steering failed at the worst possible moment. No amount of training could overcome those circumstances. The NTSB's final report concluded that the primary cause was the steering failure on the Summit Venture. But it listed multiple contributing factors. Deferred maintenance. Poor visibility. Bridge design that didn't account for ship impact. Inadequate channel marking for conditions of poor visibility. The recommendations changed how America builds bridges. And that's why this story matters. Recommendation 1. All bridges crossing navigable waterways must be designed to withstand ship impact. This means massive dolphins, concrete and steel structures built around piers to absorb collision energy. These dolphins are now standard on every major bridge built since 1980. The new standard, published as Federal Highway Administration Technical Advisory T51401, specifies that bridge piers in navigable channels must be protected by fender systems capable of absorbing impact from the largest vessel that uses the channel. These fender systems typically consist of concrete islands surrounding the pier, reinforced with steel, designed to crush and absorb energy rather than transfer it to the pier structure. Recommendation 2. Enhanced channel marking. Electronic navigation aids. Radar reflectors. Systems that allow ships to navigate safely even in zero visibility. Tampa Bay now has one of the most sophisticated channel marking systems in the United States. Coast Guard Captain Thomas Reed oversaw the installation of the new navigation system. He explained the improvements in a trade journal article. We installed high-intensity radar reflectors on all channel markers. We upgraded the electronic charts to include real-time position reporting. We installed redundant GPS transponders at critical points in the channel. A ship can now navigate this channel in zero visibility with the same precision as in clear weather. The technology didn't exist in 1980. It exists now, and it's saving lives. Recommendation 3. Mandatory steering system inspections. Ships entering U.S. waters must demonstrate that their steering systems meet strict maintenance standards. No more deferred maintenance. No more worn seals and deteriorating hydraulics. The new regulations require steering system certification every 6 months, with inspection by certified marine surveyors. Any deficiency results in detention of the vessel until repairs are completed. Ships that repeatedly defer maintenance can be banned from U.S. ports. Recommendation 4. Harbor pilot training. Enhanced simulation training for emergency scenarios. Pilots now practice steering failures, engine failures, and poor visibility situations in simulators before they ever take control of a real ship. The American Pilots Association developed a comprehensive training program based on lessons from the Skyway disaster. Captain Michael Torres, the association's training director, described the program. Every pilot now trains on full-mission bridge simulators. We replicate the exact conditions of the Skyway collapse. Fog, steering failure, emergency anchoring, radio communications. The trainee has to manage all of it in real time. Some fail. They don't pass certification until they can handle these emergencies correctly. We're training pilots to deal with the worst-case scenario. Because as the Skyway proved, worst-case scenarios happen. Recommendation 5. Bridge design standards. The new Sunshine Skyway Bridge, completed in 1987, incorporated every lesson learned from the disaster. Massive concrete dolphins protect the piers. The main span is high enough that ships pass underneath without needing to navigate between piers. The design can withstand impact from ships twice the size of the Summit Venture. But recommendations and new standards don't bring back the 35 people who died. Don't erase the trauma experienced by survivors. Don't lift the burden of guilt carried by John Lerro. Lerro testified at the NTSB hearing. He described the fog, the steering failure, the helpless feeling of watching the pier approach and knowing there was nothing he could do. He was visibly shaken. He had piloted hundreds of ships through Tampa Bay without incident. And now, through no fault of his own, 35 people were dead. The transcript of Lerro's testimony reveals a man broken by the disaster. Asked to describe the moment he realized the ship would hit the bridge, he responded, "I knew it the moment the steering failed. I knew exactly where we were. I could see the bridge on radar. I knew our speed. I knew our momentum. Simple physics. There was nothing I could do to stop it. I ordered the anchors down. I ordered full reverse. I radioed the Coast Guard. But I knew people were going to die and I couldn't stop it." When asked if he could have done anything differently, Lerro's response was simple. "No, I've reviewed it 1,000 times in my mind. 1,000,000 times. I did everything I was trained to do. Everything by the book. It wasn't enough. It will never be enough. Those people are still dead." The investigation cleared him of any wrongdoing. The NTSB found that he acted appropriately given the circumstances. That no reasonable pilot could have prevented the collision once the steering failed in those conditions. But that didn't matter to Lerro. He blamed himself anyway. Dr. Patricia Morrison, a psychologist who counseled Lerro after the disaster, testified before a congressional committee about his mental state. Captain Lerro suffers from severe post-traumatic stress disorder. He experiences intrusive memories, nightmares, flashbacks to the moment of impact. He blames himself despite clear evidence that he bears no responsibility. This is classic survivor guilt compounded by the burden of professional responsibility. He believes that as the pilot, he should have prevented it. No amount of rational discussion can penetrate that belief. The trauma is profound and likely permanent. He continued working as a harbor pilot for several years after the disaster. But the weight of it never left him. Colleagues said he became withdrawn, anxious. He would have panic attacks when fog rolled in. Fellow pilot James Anderson described the change. John was never the same after the Skyway. He was a confident, skilled pilot before. After, he was tentative, fearful. Every foggy morning, he'd get physically sick before taking a ship. But he kept working, kept piloting. I think he was trying to prove to himself that he could still do it. That he wasn't a failure. But the fear never left him. He eventually left the profession. And in 1993, 13 years after the disaster, John Lerro took his own life. The guilt, the trauma, the weight of 35 deaths, proved too much to bear. The Tampa Tribune reported his death with the headline, "Skyway Pilot Dies. Legacy of Tragedy Ends." The article quoted his family. John never forgave himself for the Skyway disaster. Even though he was cleared of all fault. Even though everyone told him it wasn't his fault. He carried those 35 deaths with him every day. In the end, the burden was too heavy. We tried to help him. So did the professionals. But some wounds don't heal. Some guilt can't be resolved. John is at peace now. We have to believe that. Think about that. A competent professional doing his job correctly. Following all procedures. Making all the right decisions. And still, through circumstances beyond his control, people died. And he carried that burden until it killed him. Gary Bettendorf, the fisherman who survived the fall in his pickup truck, never went back to commercial fishing. The physical injuries healed. Broken ribs. Bruised organs. Cuts and lacerations. But the psychological trauma remained. He told reporters years later that he still had nightmares about the fall. About hitting the water. About the truck sinking. About swimming up through 40 feet of water not knowing if he would make it. In a 1990 interview with the St. Petersburg Times, Bettendorf described the long-term impact. "I can't drive over bridges anymore. Any bridge, even small ones. I get panic attacks. My heart starts racing. I break out in sweats. I know it's irrational. I know the new Skyway is safe. But my body doesn't know that. My body remembers falling, remembers the impact, remembers thinking I was going to die. You don't get over something like that. You just learn to live with it." Wesley McIntyre, the Greyhound passenger who escaped the sinking bus, suffered survivor's guilt for decades. Why did he survive when 34 others didn't? He was sitting in the back of the bus. That's the only reason. Random chance. The back of the bus hit the water slightly later, slightly less violently. He happened to be near a window that shattered on impact. He happened to be conscious enough to realize the bus was sinking. He happened to be physically capable of pulling himself through the window. Luck. Nothing but luck. McIntyre rarely spoke publicly about the disaster. But in 2005, on the 25th anniversary, he gave a television interview. His words capture the burden of survival. "I think about them every day. The people on that bus. I didn't know any of them. Never saw most of their faces. But we died together, except I didn't die. I got out, and I don't know why. Why me? Why not the mother with the baby? Why not the old man in the front seat? I've asked myself that question for 25 years. There's no answer. It was random, chance, luck, and that makes it worse somehow. If there was a reason, I could accept it. But there's no reason. I just got lucky." The families of the victims filed lawsuits against the bridge authority, against the shipping company, against everyone involved. The cases took years to resolve. Settlements were reached. Money changed hands. But money doesn't replace a mother, a father, a husband, a wife, a child. The largest settlement went to the family of Robert Crosby, the traveling salesman. His widow, Martha Crosby, received $1.2 million. She told reporters, "No amount of money brings him back. No amount makes up for the phone call that never came, for the dinners we never had, for growing old alone. The money sits in the bank. I can't spend it. It feels like blood money. The price they put on my husband's life. $1.2 million. That's what he was worth to them. To me, he was priceless." The old Sunshine Skyway Bridge, what remained of it after the collapse, was demolished. The approach spans were removed. The piers were torn down. But the decision was made to leave some of the old pier structures in place. They were cut down to just below the water surface and left as artificial reefs. Marine biologist Dr. Stephen Garcia studied these artificial reefs in the years after the disaster. The old bridge piers have become important marine habitat. Grouper, snapper, and other reef fish use them as shelter. Coral and other sessile organisms have colonized the concrete. In a strange way, the disaster created ecological benefit. The structures that failed to protect human life now support marine life. It's not redemption, but it's something. Nature reclaimed the footings. Today, the old pier structures serve as artificial reefs, habitats for fish and marine life. A memorial to the disaster in their own way. The new Sunshine Skyway Bridge opened in 1987. 7 years of construction. $244 million. 4 miles long. The main span rises 190 feet above the water, high enough that ships pass underneath without approaching any piers. Massive concrete dolphins surround every support structure. The design can withstand impact from ships displacing 87,000 tons. More than 4 times the size of the Summit Venture. Chief engineer Gene Figg, son of the original bridge designer, led the new bridge project. He incorporated every lesson from the disaster. In an interview at the bridge opening ceremony, he explained the design philosophy. The old bridge was a product of its time. Good engineering by the standards of 1954. But those standards weren't adequate. We know better now. This new bridge is designed to survive what the old bridge couldn't. Ship impact, hurricanes, earthquakes. We built in redundancy, multiple load paths, fail-safe systems. If a ship hits this bridge, the dolphins will absorb the impact. The piers will stand. The roadway will remain intact. We learned from tragedy. This bridge is the result of that learning. It's beautiful. Cable-stayed design. Distinctive yellow cables radiating from 2 main towers. The same yellow color as the original bridge. A tribute to what was lost. But also a testament to what was learned. At the south end of the bridge, there's a memorial. A simple fishing pier built from remnants of the original bridge approach spans. Plaques list the names of the 35 victims. People come here to fish. To remember. To look out at the water and think about what happened that foggy morning in May. The memorial was dedicated on May 9, 1982. The second anniversary of the disaster. Families of the victims attended. Florida Governor Bob Graham spoke. His words, preserved in newspaper accounts, acknowledged both the tragedy and the progress. We gather here to remember 35 souls lost in a disaster that should never have happened. Their deaths were not meaningless. From their loss came knowledge. From knowledge came change. From change came this new bridge, this safer bridge. We cannot bring them back, but we can honor them by learning from what happened, by building better, by protecting future travelers. This memorial stands as testament to their memory and to our commitment that such a tragedy never occurs again. Martha Crosby, widow of victim Robert Crosby, spoke at the dedication. She placed a bouquet of flowers on the memorial plaque bearing her husband's name. Her voice broke as she read the inscription. Robert James Crosby, loving husband, born 1942, died May 9, 1980. Gone but never forgotten. She told the assembled crowd, he was just going to work. Just a normal day, a normal trip. He should have come home that night. We should have had dinner. Should have grown old together. Instead, I have this plaque, this memorial, and memories. That's all I have left. Stand at that memorial and look north across Tampa Bay. You can see the new bridge. The cables. The towers. The massive dolphins protecting the piers. You can see the ships passing safely underneath. And if the fog rolls in, thick and patchy like it was on May 9, 1980, you can almost understand how it happened. How a competent pilot could lose his bearings. How a ship could drift into a pier. How 35 people could fall into the bay in the span of 8 minutes. The engineering failures were fixed. New standards. New designs. New safety systems. But some things can't be fixed. The trauma. The guilt. The loss. Those remain, decades later, in the survivors and the families and anyone who remembers that morning. The Sunshine Skyway disaster killed 35 people. But the number of lives affected extends far beyond that. The survivors. The rescue workers who pulled bodies from the water. The engineers who investigated the failure. The families who lost loved ones. The community that watched their landmark bridge collapse. The harbor pilot who carried guilt until it killed him. Coast Guard rescue swimmer Thomas Martinez, who participated in the body recovery operations, developed PTSD that ended his career. He described his experience in a support group for first responders. I've pulled bodies from the water before. Drowning victims. Boating accidents. It's part of the job. But the Skyway was different. The scale of it. The violence of it. Bodies that had fallen 150 feet. The trauma was extreme, and there were so many. We worked for days recovering victims. Each one took something from me. Each one left a mark. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. Eventually, I had to leave the service. The Skyway ended my career. More than that, it changed who I am. I'm not the same person I was before that morning. Disasters like this ripple outward. They change policies. Improve designs. Save future lives. Every bridge built since 1980 is safer because of what happened that day. Every harbor pilot is better trained. Every ship is better maintained. The 35 people who died became the reason that future disasters were prevented. That's cold comfort to their families. To the survivors. To anyone who lost someone that morning. But it's the truth of how engineering advances. Through failure. Through tragedy. Through learning what went wrong and fixing it so it can never happen again. Dr. Henry Petrosky, an engineering historian who wrote extensively about the Skyway disaster, put it this way in his book To Engineer is Human. Failure is the ultimate teacher in engineering. Success teaches us little. We repeat what worked without understanding why. But failure demands analysis, understanding, change. The Sunshine Skyway disaster killed 35 people. Those deaths led to new standards that have prevented countless future deaths. That doesn't make the tragedy acceptable, doesn't justify the loss, but it gives the loss meaning. The victims of the Skyway died so that future travelers wouldn't. That's a hard truth, but it's the truth nonetheless. The final cost of the Sunshine Skyway disaster. 35 lives. Hundreds of millions in economic impact. Years of trauma for survivors and witnesses. The career and eventually the life of John Lerro. The transformation of bridge engineering standards across the United States. The complete redesign and reconstruction of one of Florida's most important transportation links. All because of 6 seconds. 6 seconds when a steering system failed at exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time in exactly the wrong weather conditions. 6 seconds that changed everything. The deck officer had exactly 6 seconds to make a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But the truth is, there was no decision to make. The physics were already in motion. The outcome was already determined. The pier would be struck. The bridge would fall. People would die. All he could do was watch it happen and live with the aftermath. That's the real horror of the Sunshine Skyway disaster. Not that it happened through negligence or incompetence, but that it happened despite everything being done correctly. Despite training. Despite experience. Despite procedures. Sometimes the circumstances align in ways that no amount of preparation can prevent. And all you can do is try to learn from it. Try to make sure it never happens again. And remember the people who died so that future travelers could cross the bay safely. The new Sunshine Skyway Bridge carries 50,000 vehicles per day. Most drivers don't know the history. Don't know about the fog. The ship. The fall. The 35 people who died. They just know it's a beautiful bridge on a beautiful day across beautiful water. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's how it should be. The memorial remembers. The engineering changes remember. The new safety systems remember. So the rest of us can cross the bridge without fear. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and patchy across Tampa Bay, when visibility drops to near zero and ships sound their horns in the channel, the old-timers remember. The survivors remember. The families remember. And for a moment, the ghosts of the Sunshine Skyway disaster are there again. Falling through the fog. Into the water. 150 feet down. In those 8 minutes that changed everything. The bridge stands now as both a monument and a warning. A monument to engineering excellence. To lessons learned. To lives lost but not forgotten. And a warning that no matter how well we design, no matter how much we prepare, no matter how many procedures we follow, sometimes the circumstances align in ways we cannot predict or prevent. All we can do is learn. Improve. And remember. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this. Stories of disasters that changed everything. Stories of failures that led to improvements. Stories of the thin line between routine and catastrophe. Because these aren't just history lessons. These are warnings. Reminders that the bridges we cross, the buildings we enter, the ships we sail, are only as safe as the lessons we've learned from past failures. 35 people went into Tampa Bay on May 9, 1980. The water was 78 degrees. The fall was 150 feet. The impact was unsurvivable for all but one. Their names are carved in stone at the Memorial Pier. Robert James Crosby. Agnes Marie Wilson. David Allen Strickland. Margaret Ann Hawkins. 31 others whose names deserve to be remembered. Their deaths changed how America builds bridges. And their memory remains, a fog-bound morning when the indestructible bridge proved all too destructible, when the unsinkable ship destroyed what was supposed to last forever. when 8 minutes of terror created safety standards that protect millions of travelers every single day. The Sunshine Skyway Bridge stands as proof that we learn from tragedy. That engineering improves through failure. That the highest price paid by those 35 victims was not paid in vain. Every safe crossing. Every ship that passes underneath without incident. Every foggy morning when modern navigation systems prevent what happened in 1980. That's their legacy. The deck officer had exactly 6 seconds. The bridge had 8 minutes. The victims had 4 seconds of falling. And the aftermath has lasted 44 years and counting. That's the mathematics of disaster. Measured in seconds. Remembered in decades. Changed forever. And somewhere in Tampa Bay, 80 feet below the surface, the rusted hull of a Greyhound bus sits on the bottom, a ghost ship from that foggy morning, a tomb for those who never made it out, a reminder that safety is written in blood, purchased with lives, and maintained only through constant vigilance and the humility to learn from our failures.